This summer, Texas lawmakers redrew the state's congressional districts, with one of the key drivers being a recent court decision that undermined nearly 4 decades of precedent. That legal shift traces back to a 1987 case in Baytown when Black and Hispanic voters challenged the city's congressional map lines. Now the new ruling is reshaping how Texas and potentially other states approach representation, race, and redistricting. Joining us now to unpack this complex moment is Eleanor Klibanoff, law and politics reporter for the Texas Tribune. Eleanor, welcome to Hello Houston.
Thanks for having me.
If you would like to join the conversation and have a question or a comment on redistricting, you can join us at 713-440-8870.
You know, Eleanor, I think a lot of folks, when they think about what's happening right now with redistricting, they think, oh, well, you know, this has always been in order, and now that they are altering the course of the way things have always been. But your reporting takes us back and talks about how this all began right here in our own backyard. So if you could take me back to 1987 and explain what actually was the impetus here and what the tradition is that we are in some ways bucking today.
Sure. So in 1987, the issue at hand actually was a very small issue, which was the city council seats in the city of Baytown. And there was a local activist, Tony Campos, who felt like it was not fair that the 6 seats that they had on the city council were all elected by the entire city, which meant that the 25% of the city that was non-white was often drowned out in the vote because there was no sort of districts drawn around areas that were predominantly Black or predominantly Hispanic. So white candidates just won every single time. And there had been some recent court rulings nationally saying, you know, looking at these at-large districts saying, you know, right, they might be sort of diluting the voting power of Black and Hispanic voters. And so they brought this lawsuit to challenge Baytown system and won. And as you said, sort of created a court precedent that lasted for 40 years.
You know, it's interesting because we hear about redistricting not being allowed by racial lines. Mm-hmm. But when you look at this situation, it seems like it was the right thing to do because the brown people and the Black people were being cut out of the race by all of the white people. So it was done along racial lines, but morally probably the correct way to go. And apparently legally it was at that time also.
Right. I mean, the issue of race and the Voting Rights Act and all of that is really complicated and nuanced. You know, I think there are certainly now conservatives say, you know, race should not be a factor at all. But, you know, the Voting Rights Act, when it was originally created, was to remediate the fact that race really was playing a huge role and that Black and brown voters were not able to get their votes, you know, have their vote count. And so race has always been a part of redistricting, has always been a part of, you know, these lawsuits. So it's sort of a somewhat newer idea to say race shouldn't play a role at all. It's to say you have to sort of take it into account in the right ways, but not sort of over take it into account either. It's very complicated.
Now, if I'm reading everything correctly in this, that what the ripple, the wrinkle, that's the term I'm looking for in this was, it wasn't just looking at groups that were left out. It was combining groups and saying, therefore, they should represent together as opposed to saying the Black or Hispanic vote.
Right. So there had been previous court cases in which, you know, Black voters in North Carolina said, our voices are not being heard. The court ruled in their favor. This was saying, in Baytown, Black and Hispanic voters combined make up 25% of the population. And the data showed that they voted similarly to each other and different than the white voters. So they brought what was called at the time and is still a coalition claim saying together our votes are being diluted and we should have more of a voice. The Fifth Circuit, the appeals court said, you are right. You should be able to sort of join forces if you can prove that you vote similarly, bring these cases together. And that has resulted in a lot of, you know, court rulings over the years where Black and Hispanic or Black and Asian or Asian and Hispanic voters come together to bring these complaints.
So coalition districts went nationwide after this vote, correct?
Yes, other appeals courts sort of just kept citing the Fifth Circuit on that.
So, how do you think these two cases, or the cases that we've been talking about, are coming into what we're seeing today and what's happening today when we're looking at the redistricting of the maps?
So conservative groups have wanted to get rid of coalition claims almost since the Baytown case. This has been sort of on their agenda to get rid of. They think it was wrongly decided at the time and should have never been. You should have to have a majority in a certain district of one race to bring a voting rights claim. So in 2024, a case out of Galveston, the Fifth Circuit, which has become much more conservative since the 80s and has changed very its political bent pretty significantly since then, ruled to say that coalition claims should not be able to be brought, which was a really huge ruling and had a lot of implications. And people, I think, sort of thought, wow, next time we redistrict in 2031, this is going to change everything.
Right.
What we didn't anticipate was that President Trump would ask Texas to redistrict in 2025. And the impetus or the motive that his Department of Justice cited was that case. So it suddenly sort of there was political motivations, absolutely, from President Trump citing this case as the legal justification.
Well, I don't know if you have it at your fingertips. So what now? I mean, the script is flipped. So what now is the white population in Houston compared to the black and brown population?
Mm-hmm.
You guys probably have those stats more than I do, but I do think it's not surprising to me that both of these cases came out of sort of the general broader Gulf Coast Texas area. I mean, it's a very racially diverse area. It's not necessarily areas where it's purely segregated, just black or white or just white or Hispanic. It's a very, melting pot area. So it makes sense that these fights over can you bring a coalition claim would come out of these diverse areas.
Well, it would seem to me that white voters would have the same argument as black and brown voters had back in 1987, to say that as a white voter, I don't have any voice anymore because there are more black and brown voters than there are white voters. So, I mean, as you said earlier, it's always about race.
Certainly, yeah. I think that's certainly the argument that, the Galveston and now the state has argued in various lawsuits and legal briefs to say, what their main argument is that the Voting Rights Act, which did specifically protect black and brown voters, should have time limits, right? If it hasn't fixed it by now, it's not going to fix it. This has been, more than enough time, and we need to sort of stop taking race into account in this way. That's certainly the conservative argument. Sort of let everybody just vote, and if this group has power, they get to draw the lines. That's the way the cookie crumbles.
Just to quickly, for sake of point of reference, in the 2020 census, Black and African American population of Harris County was at 18.7%, and those that identify as Hispanic was at 43%.
I don't know,
give you an idea.
But I wonder what the voters.
Right, I'm just giving you an idea of the population. So it is definitely a white are a majority. I don't remember how that expression goes.
Well,
but
yeah. It gets back to apartheid is what it gets back to.
Well, let me get back to our conversation here, Eleanor, and ask you, when we talk about the difference in the behavior of the way voters vote. So you're looking at these coalition districts saying, we vote similarly, therefore we should represent together. Does that hold true, or what are we seeing today is more of we have a conservative bloc that vote together and a liberal group that vote together, and therefore that would then support the concept of you can gerrymander along political lines as opposed to racial lines? Have we merged enough that the liberal voice is the liberal voice regardless of race and the conservative voice is the conservative voice, or am I off on this?
So the U.S. Supreme Court has said that, if you're drawing lines purely based on partisan goals, like you said, right? If you're able to say, well, this area votes liberal and it's not about race, it's just that they all vote liberal, you can draw them together and draw the conservatives together. And, as long as you're not taking race into account in a way that is improper, that's fine. They've sort of greenlit that to some extent. And certainly Republicans are saying now, well, Latinos are voting much more, swung very strongly for President Trump in 2024. The data doesn't necessarily hold up this idea that they vote the same as Black voters and different than white voters. So it is all much more complicated than it was when the Voting Rights Act went into effect. But there is overall, you have to look at multiple elections over time. And this, certainly the Latino voting trends, we'll see after, the 2026, are they sticking with the Republican Party? Is that swinging back? These are not sort of uh, things that go into effect immediately right after one election to say, oh, they voted for Republicans, we get to draw the lines this way. And a lot of this just gets sorted out while we talk about in the court of public opinion. It gets sorted out by, in the courts with judges and with so much data and so much stuff that, is really, really particular about how you can and cannot take race into account.
Wow. Well, it seems like they're taking more and more party affiliation into account. These AI systems, they don't care if a home is a black person or a white person or a brown person. They care whether they voted Republican or Democrat. And so they are redistricting just based on all this area has Republicans, so therefore we will be assured a Republican seat. That's what doesn't seem fair about redistricting, whereas in 1987 that did seem fair.
I think certainly that's the state's argument, is that we didn't look at race at all. We just redrew this based on how can we maximize our political advantage. I think the ongoing hearing, we're waiting on a ruling on the 2026 or the maps that they just drew this year in 2025. The plaintiffs argued that they did take race into account, that it was discriminatory in that way. And, the fact that they drew several districts, including in the Houston area, that are 50.1% Hispanic, 50.1% non-white, and pointed to that as, proof that they were sort of drawing more districts that were more, aimed at the Hispanic voter, for example, is a sign that they did take race into account and are sort of hiding behind this partisan defense. So we'll wait and see what the judges think on that.
Do you have any update on that?
Account.
Do you have any update on what the judges are thinking?
No, we're waiting on a ruling. Could be any day now. Obviously, we're coming up quite quickly on the deadline for people to announce what seat they're running in. They need to know what seats exist, and we anticipate that will go to the U.S. Supreme Court. So expecting a ruling really any day now.
Eleanor, looking at these different cases, and then here we are again in 2025, and the conversation continues to happen, and yet the questions are still the same in regarding at looking at coalitions. Do you think there should be time limits or, on these type coalitions, given the fact that we have changed so much demographically and census-wise in our area?
I mean, I'm a journalist. I'm not, a sort of able to give necessarily the legal analysis on that. I think certainly that is the next frontier for or sort of the next question that awaits the Voting Rights Act. There is a case before the U.S. Supreme Court right now out of Louisiana that addresses that exact question, and the justices have said they're sort of taking a second look at, do we still need these protections from the Voting Rights Act, which certainly many plaintiff groups say, absolutely we do. There is absolutely, if left to their own devices, states like Texas would racially discriminate against voters. Obviously, the state says they would not.
Just for a point of clarity again for our audience listening, tomorrow they are voting on the Texas 18th and trying to find who will represent us there. We are still currently under the 2020 map. And so folks that are hearing all this conversation are confused. You have nothing to be confused about right now. This is a seat, an established seat, and this is what you're voting for. But as you were just mentioning, Eleanor, that could all change very soon. I'm curious if the courts uphold the 2025 redrawn map, what happens to the lawsuit about the 2020 map? Does that invalidate any elections that happened under a misdrawn map, or do we simply accept 2025's map and move forward, forgetting about what happened in 2020?
Oh, great question. The map that until this summer that we were operating under was actually officially drawn in 2021, and that was still facing a legal challenge. There had been a trial earlier this summer where the judges heard evidence from both sides for a month. We were awaiting a ruling on that when this 2025 redraw happened, which makes it all very complicated. But we will still need a ruling on the 2021 maps. There's no threat of it invalidating elections because the judges have sort of proactively said, go ahead with these maps while we sort all this out. So those elections will remain. But even with this ruling on the 2025 map, which is just a congressional map, we will need a ruling on the 2021 maps, which is the State House, the State Board of Education. There's other sort of legal questions remaining with that. So none of this is resolved by any of this.
Messy.
Crazy.
Eleanor Klibanoff
Yes.
is the law and politics reporter for the Texas Tribune. Eleanor, thank you for joining us today on Hello Houston.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Alex.